Welcome back. It is Razor Sharp Report, aka Bold Like a Lever, and we are going to talk about the crazy week in terms of both the special election in Texas and the primary elections that happened the same day in other parts of the country. Also, the Biden economy, which is it just doesn't seem to be able to get out of reverse. Also, the disastrous situation in Ukraine, which I think will backfire on the United States. It already has started to backfire, really. Americans have largely ignored how Russia has prepared itself for decoupling from the world economy, which is an important phenomenon. It's been happening for the past couple of years. China has also made some strides to do this. So, what are we going to talk about first? Well, Mayra Flores is the new Congresswoman-elect from the state of Texas, from the 34th District, abutting the Mexican border. It's in a region called the Rio Grande Valley, and that's traditionally a very Democratic district. It has an overwhelming 85% Hispanic population. Her district at least does. I think there's portions of the valley that may be even higher in terms of their Hispanic demographic proportion. And the district had never been under Republican control. Not as the 34th district and not as any of the other districts that came before it. It was newly created several years ago, and the only person who has held the specific geographic area was Filemon Vela, who recently quit Congress, just up and resigned in order to take a job as a lobbyist. And like many people within the Democratic establishment, he's simply taken it for granted that his district will remain Democratic because Latinos in general have usually voted Democratic over the past few decades. Well, that trend is starting to see a major reversal because Latinos overwhelming, they're simply saying no to the Democratic Party. And really the reasons seem to be economic. In some cases, they seem to be religious and social in nature. I always try to look through statistics and polling in order to discern whether what I'm looking at is really trustworthy. So what is known is that Hispanic Catholics are generally more religious than white ones. And the Catholic Church, of course, strong position on abortion, and there is one Hispanic congressman from the same region as the 34th district. I think he's in one. I think he might be like the 32nd district. Harvey Cuellar, and I think it might be Javier Cuellar. But anyway, so Cuellar is the only pro-life Democrat left in Congress. There used to be a large proportion of the Democratic Party was pro-life, and they've gradually just been eaten away both by Republicans who say that they're not conservative enough and they don't stand up enough for the rights of the unborn, and by Democrats who say that people who don't believe in the right to choose don't belong in the Democratic Party. Well, this could begin to bite into the fortunes of the Democrats within the Hispanic community. I think that there are many families in many Latino families. I mean, it depends really. You have to chop it up not by whether they're Latino, but which Latino community they come from, because it really, really depends. There are Central Americans. Many of them are Pentecostal or members of other church denominations. But, depending on what region of the country in, you have a different degree of devotion to Christianity. Also, you have some Hispanics who belong to other religions. I know Hispanics who are Muslim. I know Hispanics who are Jewish. But also, type of belief system that they hold can also vary by the country of origin, whether it's Mexico or Cuba or Puerto Rico, which is, everybody should probably know that Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. There are many Hispanics who are evangelical Christians. So this notion that the Democratic Party that they've had for many years, they called it the Browning of America. Soledad O'Brien of CNN she would talk about it very frequently, and so did other CNN contributors and anchors. I know Fareed Zakaria would talk about it. They were behaving as if, people are just going to have to cope. The Browning of America is here, and they will bring with them the key to a progressive globalist future, because obviously their vision of the future will be to enable immigration because they want others to have the same pathway as they did. Well, it's not entirely true, because many of the communities where Latinos traditionally live in the U.S., people who have lived here for their entire lives or for generations, right? Their family may have been born in the U.S. They're all the way back to several generations of grandparents and great-grandparents in places like the Rio Grande Valley, which have always had a large Hispanic population. They have no interest in having large-scale illegal immigration, because first of all, if they have a vocation that's working class or low wage, they don't need the competition from illegal aliens. They need those jobs, or else they're going to be priced out of the market. They're simply, why would anybody pay somebody $25 an hour to be installing, let's say, aluminum siding, when you could get an illegal alien to do it for much less, or maybe even two people to do it for the same price? That's a question that people who are illegal immigration advocates can never answer, because they don't want it to be about economics. They want it to be about race. They only see Hispanics as a racial category. They don't see them as possibly having religious, cultural, and economic concerns. And that's really one of the problems with modern liberalism that I see. I don't necessarily define myself as a doctrinary conservative, because I do believe in a number of classical liberal values that may clash with traditional conservatism. But I do think that conservatives and the few classical liberals that there are, they see the person in a more holistic sense, that they have a religious, social, and often and for sure an economical concern that gives a broader picture than just the race and color of their skin. So I do think it's a real problem, the way that Democrats and the liberal media and progressives relate to the Hispanic community. They also do the same sometimes to the Asian community, and they've started using these ridiculous acronyms like AAPI, as if, suddenly you create an acronym and people ought to belong to it. Well, that's not the way people's minds work, right? And the same thing with Latinos. They've started saying Latinx, right? When I was a kid, there were two words. Okay, there was Latino and there was Hispanic, or Latina if you knew the person was female. If people want a non-gender term for a Latino person, they can just use the word Hispanic, but they don't want to do it. They want to modify the language, so they created Latinx, which is it sounds like Kleenex. It's just one of those words that sound like Ministry of Truth doublespeak from 1984. One of these words that signify regime ways of thinking. So those elements, I think, are alienating members of the Democratic of the traditional Democratic voter base that is Hispanic, and I think it's going to come back to bite them in the ass. There are many districts in Nevada, in New Mexico, in Arizona, in Texas, in Colorado, in perhaps in other states that are from other Latino communities like Illinois, that you could see a major departure of voters from the Democratic Party to either to the Republicans or not voting at all. I don't know if it's going to lead to all the seats flipping that I'm talking about, but it would certainly cause, and it should cause, major panic in the Democratic Party, but many of them are simply asleep at the wheel. Sean Patrick Maloney, the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, simply blew off the results. He said that Mayra Flores is going to have a short stay. She's going to be sent packing in November. And I think that she should post that quote in her campaign headquarters and, use it in her campaign and to say that people who are Democratic Party insiders, they've basically made it their goal to keep the status quo the way it is in the Rio Grande Valley, and she's the one fighting for change. And I think, as somebody who, the Republican Party has not really done much to earn the trust of its voter base, but something like this, something like a woman who can be the standard bearer winning, and that could change the perception of the party among many people. I would still say that ideologically I belong more in the Libertarian Party, especially the one that's now taking shape after its leadership has been replaced. The old woke leadership was completely destroyed in a recent convention. Not that most people pay attention because, let's be honest, the Libertarian Party is a joke, and most of the movement is largely engaged in internal warfare, and they don't really accomplish much. But the GOP really needed somebody like her, and she could present this new image of being the anti-Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's married to a Border Patrol policeman. She is from a working class background. She actually is an immigrant from Mexico, whereas Ocasio-Cortez is from a Puerto Rican family, which, no offense, but what does that have to do with immigration? Right? There was no actual connection between her and the issue of immigration, to my knowledge. I think both of her parents are Puerto Rican, if I'm not mistaken. So her activism on behalf of illegal aliens is largely a curiosity, if you think about it. It has, her messaging is really relying on the ignorance of Americans to the fact that Puerto Rico is a part of the U.S. She was never in any, her activism on behalf of Dreamers, you could say, is altruistic, but for the fact that she exploits this notion that all Hispanic people are the same. We're going to talk about now the other primaries that happened that day. There was a big two big contests in South Carolina where you had two anti-Trump congressmen that were running for re-election. One of them was less of a confrontational person, Nancy Mason. She basically groveled and prostrated herself and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Donald Trump, that I criticized you. Please forgive me. I know you endorse the other woman, but I will I will crawl back to you in order to get your vote so I can stay in Congress." That was Nancy Mace. I was a little surprised, but she did prevail and she returned to Congress. So there is no evidence that disavowing or criticizing Donald Trump is an automatic ticket to losing your nomination in the GOP. But people who voted for impeachment and who have actively campaigned saying that they're critics of Trump and they don't support him, like the other Congressman, Tom Rice, they have a rough road ahead of them, and he's the first person to actually face re-election. Some of the other ones have already retired and said that they're not going to run again because they have no prospect of actually getting re-elected. But Tom Rice was handily defeated, which portends very ill tidings for his colleague, Liz Cheney, who is running for re-election in Wyoming. And she should be worried that the result will not only lead to her defeat, but it'll be pretty embarrassing because she has no hope of actually, look, I don't think that she actually has a chance of winning the nomination, but Liz Cheney's main goal, I think, would be to say, look, there's still a substantial remnant of Republicans in Wyoming that have enough of a loyalty to her stream of the GOP that they would vote for her over Donald Trump's condemnation. And I think that the lower her result, the more it will be apparent that people don't actually like her, and that the Cheney family is largely, their hold on the party is fading, and it's faded largely into the past because of their role in the war in Iraq and the Bush administration. So I would say that the Never Trump movement, such as it is falling apart. They're not really having any effect on the elections, and they're finding themselves increasingly on the outside of the party. A number of them have registered to be Democrats, such as Steve Schmidt in Utah. I actually wrote a piece about his activities a few weeks ago. They've given up, and they don't even have a definition of what they are. Are they conservative? No. What are they doing? They're not advocating for the rights of gun owners. They're not advocating for traditional marriage. They're not advocating for, the right to life. There is nothing conservative about them. They're not really advocating for anything. All they're doing is being against Donald Trump. And look, there's a lot of criticism I think you could heap at Trump. His decision not to offer a pardon to either Edward Snowden or Julian Assange is one of the reasons that Assange is probably going to be extradited in the near future. Priti Patel, the UK foreign minister or secretary, actually today, she gave her consent that Assange will be extradited to the US. That's a major problem, in my opinion. It shows the shallowness of Republicans and their Tory counterparts in the UK, who they don't understand that individual rights, civil liberties, those are values that they can actually stand for, and make conservatism about that, attract many people who normally don't consider themselves conservatives over into that camp. People who are classical liberals and libertarians like myself, we have reservations about the GOP because of people like that, people who say one thing and don't mean it. And while Donald Trump is preferable to Liz Cheney, he never really dismantled the surveillance state. He signed the Patriot Act renewals every time. He increased military spending. He did interventions in several areas, such as Syria. And, I think that you can criticize a person for topical reasons. And I try to do it. And there are people who look at Donald Trump and they see a person who is very flawed, but preferable to the current guy, Joe Biden certainly, but somebody who like Liz Cheney, who is just she's an animal for war. She just oozes this craving for intervention in the Middle East, just like her dad. Those people, I think, they are responsible for a lot of the problems that we have today. With all of my criticism for everything that the Democratic Party represents, let's not forget about the ghouls that inhabit the GOP. So with that being said, let's move over to the Biden administration. They are hemorrhaging support. They are destroying the economy. The recent numbers this week on the Dow, for example, it's retreated to under 30,000. The Dow and the S&P 500 are both in a bear market. I think the Nasdaq's been in a bear market a little longer because of a number of slumps in tech stocks that have happened over the past few months already. So the Biden administration is already anticipating a recession. They're not exactly acknowledging it publicly, but they're sort of hinting at it. And they're not really preparing Americans for the world that means. It means, of course, layoffs. It means, of course, a return to a lot of the misery of the mid to late 2000s, and possibly worse, right? Because the last recession was, I think, a warning that went unheeded. And one of the ways that we got out of the recession, of course, was with bailouts, which made it slower. One of the other ways that we got out of it was by, increasing spending and doing quantitative easing in order to, loosen up the lending market. So all of that helped to get the market back on its feet, but it actually made long-term a lot of the problems that we're seeing now, they remain, and they're even worse, right? The federal government's debt continues to spiral out of control. It did so under all of the presidents that we've had, to exclude none of them, whether it's Obama or Trump or Bush or Biden or Clinton, they say was the best fiscally responsible president. That's really because he had to deal with the GOP Congress, and he gave in to a lot of their demands, and that helped to slash spending and give him the winning economy that ultimately won him the White House in 1996 for the second time. So the Biden administration is engaged in this really destructive energy policy. They are embroiled in an endless proxy war in Ukraine that's actually draining our treasury. And they're blatantly lying about inflation and about food shortages, about certain drastic shortages in baby formula and in women's hygiene products. That's one of the reasons I was saying yesterday that his new nickname should be Bleed Out Biden, because all of the women's products are many of them you can't find, apparently. It's a big story right now. So Biden is in major trouble going forward as he seeks to shore up a little bit of his already flagging popularity. He's going to have to either make a move to the center and alienate the left by saying things like, oh, we have to cut spending, or we have, and they're already raising interest rates, which is not really his doing, it's the Fed's. But he's going to have to either pander to the left by doing something like a massive student loan forgiveness program, which it's not really known whether he can legally do that, or he's going to have to give up and basically go to Mitch McConnell and say, hey, why don't we work together on a budget proposal that you guys like, and I'll simply say that it's what we need at the moment, and yada, yada, yada. So either way, I don't think it's really going to help, because he's already alienated enough people. The Democrats are really looking at him, and they're starting to ask, is there somebody else that can possibly help us, right? Because this guy just doesn't have it. And it's going to be a rough ride for them, because he's not exactly a person who's eager to leave office. There's a theory that I have developed in my head, and I don't know whether I'm gonna write about it, but it would make an interesting article. But it would have to be an opinion piece, and that would be that the reason that Biden is not stepping aside, it has nothing to do with whether he thinks, it has nothing to do with the job itself. It has nothing to do with his desire for certain policies. It does have to do with the issues of legal problems, the legal problems that his family is embroiled in, right? You see what's been happening, where there's a steady drip of acknowledgement that really the Biden family is a bunch of crooks. And it's not only Hunter Biden, it's not only the dad Joe, it's also, you have his brother, what's his name? Not Jack Biden. It's Jim Biden. So it's Jim, Joe, and Hunter. So all of them are embroiled in these very ghoulish intrigues over in Ukraine with Burisma and in China with the CEFC corporation. And often the concealment is only surface level. So all you have to do is scratch a little, as some great reporters have done. There's a reporter, I think his name is, I forget his name, but he's writing for Breitbart, who's written amazing books about Hunter Biden's corruption and the corruption of other DC insiders and their children. So those issues that are cropping up are reasons I believe not only that the Biden administration is losing popularity, but also you'll have to consider why he's not leaving office. Because so long as Biden is the president and he's able to call the shots and have influence over the Justice Department, which I think he does. I don't think he's respecting the independence of the Justice Department. I think he's intervening in it in many cases. Case in point, the parent-teacher, the parents who would protest at school boards. It seems as if the White House was active in trying to get the school boards or trying to get the Justice Department to investigate parents who went to school board meetings. So I believe that he is staying in office in order to help to forestall any legal problems that his son and brother could get the family into. And that's a major problem. It's a major problem for everybody. I don't think it's only for the Democrats or the Republicans. It basically means that, I don't know whether they're ever going to acknowledge it, but after Joe Biden leaves office, I think that there will be private conversations or thoughts among Democrats where they ask, what was the point of having him in office? Okay, he was basically a person who wrecked the economy for people, not just Republicans and independents, but for many Democrats too. He's left America basically adrift in terms of foreign policy that were not respected in Latin America either. The Summit of the Americas was a disaster. Many nations decided not to attend, and there was really no point in having it in the U.S. The U.S. decided to have it in L.A. They lobbied to have it there, and what was the problem? That many of the countries that are part of Latin America don't really have good relations with the U.S., like Nicaragua and Cuba. Understandably, I don't know if I would invite them to the U.S. So why did the U.S. have the Summit of the Americas here? Because they wanted the prestige of it. But in the end, there were countries like Mexico that said, well, if you're not going to have Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela here, then we're just not going to come either. So those are issues that the Biden administration has created that are, they're real degradations of America's standing overseas. Same thing happened with Europe. There's been major reversals with respect to America's relationship with France and the EU. The same thing, especially, the relationship with Russia and China. They've been a total disaster in terms of foreign policy. It's just because of the bad economy that more people don't notice. So Biden is a total disaster, and there will be some Democrats who have a reckoning and say that this was a moment where they realized that the party is really just about maintaining power. It isn't about any vision or belief system or plan for the American people. It is about naked exercise of political power and the ruthlessness that goes with that. And the Biden administration it's shown a lot of that in its Ukraine policy through its crazy gifts of billions and billions of dollars to the Zelensky government. I believe that they've just greenlighted another $1 billion allocation of aid to Ukraine. There are reports that not all of it has actually arrived in Ukraine because of logistical bottlenecks on the way there, right? When you have a nation at war that can't really defend its supply chain, it's hard to get stuff there, and some of the stuff gets destroyed, so some of it just automatically goes to waste because the Russians may destroy a shipment with using what they have. I forget what their missiles are called, but they do have these long-range missiles. I think they're the Grad missiles. But anyway, the Russians have largely seized the initiative in eastern Ukraine, and we are going to see, in my opinion, I don't think this is a very surprising opinion anymore. You're going to see first of all, there's many Ukrainians that are dying there. That's the tragedy. And those people that are celebrating, people who are contrarian, and they say, oh, this is great, Russia's winning. Well, do you really think that it's justifiable for one country to invade another simply to seize territory, regardless of what what's recognized in international law? Because many of the same people often heap a lot of scorn on the Israelis for similar things that happened in the past when it was a war of mutual or even defensive nature. So the same people will just cheer on Russia. They just think Russia is totally justified because they have a problem with the Biden administration. But the fact is, whether you like it or not, Russia is winning the war. Russia probably will win, period. And Ukraine is being right now shoved and nudged into a position where they'll have to give up a significant amount of territory. And at that point, this whole myth of the hero Zelensky, who was really, I think, become a demagogue, that's going to be over. I think he's going to be shoved aside either by his own underlings or the Ukrainian military or some mechanism. They might just ask him to resign because he overpromised. He was promising that Ukraine would be able to evict the Russian invaders simply by force of arms. And events have proven that that's just not the case. Yes, they had admirable performance in a number of battles where they were able to defeat superior Russian forces and get, even repel part of the invasion that focused on Kiev. But Russia was persistent enough, and they were able to play the long game, and ultimately Ukraine will probably lose more territory than Russia was demanding initially. So that would include the Donbass region, which is the two oblasts of Luhansk and Donetsk. Those are the far eastern regions of Ukraine, and then you also have two other provinces, Kherson and Zaporizhia, which are also mostly under Russian control. It looks like the Russians are going to be able to retain either full or partial control over those regions, and they'll just keep wearing down the Ukrainians and push even further. There's no really telling how far Russia is going to push their advantage at this point, because they don't have fear Zelensky or the Ukrainians at this point. They've worn them down. The Ukrainian Air Force specifically is completely overmatched. They don't have the resources to contend with the Russians, and their personnel numbers are simply thinning out, right? And this important issue I've been trying to bring up, and there's an article I worked on. Hopefully it will be published in the coming week, which I'll go into much more depth about. But foreign volunteers from Western countries have been flowing into Ukraine and basically fighting the Russians. And those people are going to become a liability at a certain point. They already have for the British government. There are two British citizens that have been condemned to death by the Donetsk People's Republic, which is a puppet state of the Russians. And there's no feasible way, at least as far as I can see, that they're going to be able to get them out without at least giving something back to the Russians and the Donetsk People's Republic, which is effectively like one of Putin's so-called, they're a proxy state. So there's 2 British citizens and a Moroccan citizen that are being held by them and condemned to death by a court of the DPR. And now apparently there are 3 Americans. I actually recorded an audio yesterday of a lot of the same topics here, and I held back because I didn't have any time. But I hope this will go up. There are now 3. Yesterday I only saw 2, but now 3 American citizens that are missing on the eastern front of Ukraine. Apparently they're all volunteers in some capacity with the Ukrainian military. And they're, 2 of them, there's evidence that they've been captured. The 3rd one, it's too early to say. That's something that Americans should be worried about. What's going to happen to those people? You already have Brittney Griner, this WNBA basketball player, who is detained by the Russians, and nobody knows how she's going to be brought back. The Russians have actually rejected a deal where a major arms dealer, Victor Bout, would be released in order to get her back into the U.S. So this is a major crisis for the Biden administration that the media is not covering because they have no interest in showing that the price for warmongering about Ukraine is that sometimes you get people like these who make a rash decision to get involved in the war because they believe in the freedom of Ukraine. I believe in the freedom of all countries. And I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, think that you can, with a straight face, justify the invasion of Ukraine. And at the same time, I don't think I'm going to go volunteer for a foreign government that's not accountable to me. They don't have any interest in my welfare. If I fall prisoner in Ukraine, as those people did, they don't have any real interest in securing my release other than perhaps pleasing the American government. They don't necessarily have to feel accountable to those people. Those people, by the way, effectively have surrendered their lives to the war in Ukraine, because when you take up arms in a conflict, you don't just get to have a do-over and demand any conditions that you want. I know that there are war crimes, so to speak, and there's the International Criminal Court in The Hague, but those issues in real warfare, it really depends how enforceable they are. There's no way that this can be enforced against the Russian government if those 2 British and the 1 Moroccan man are executed. There have already been 2 British citizens who were killed in Ukraine. One of them, I think his name was Jordan Gatley, very recently died. There was an American named Willie Cancel who was killed last month in Ukraine. And those are stories that are largely ignored in the media. So it's not going very well, but with that, I hope you do have a good weekend. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also check out my Linktree. You can find me on most of the social media companies that are out there. So you have Truth, Gab, Minds, what's the other one? Getter, and the video hosting platforms, Odyssey, Rumble, and BitChute, as well as Subscribestar, my Substack newsletter, and my Telegram forum. Have a great night. Bye-bye.